Chief, thanks for joining us. So, any updates, first of all, to the incident from this morning with this poor lady?
Well, the first thing is let's kind of recap what happened. Just a few minutes before midnight, we received a call through our 911 network from a male that identified himself with a name that was common to the family, the immediate family of the resident at the location in the 1200 block of Bluebird Street here in West Valley, indicating that there'd been a serious event that had taken place at the location, saying that he had shot his parents, had a gun, wasn't going to give himself up, and then subsequently our police units are dispatched to respond. When officers arrived and tried to make contact at the home, there was no response to that effort. As our normal protocol developed, we called out our SWAT team, our negotiators, so that we would hopefully be able to peacefully resolve the situation. Things are developing relatively rapidly at this point. Very dynamic event. But as this is all happening, our investigators on the scene and supervisors are beginning to notice there are some inconsistencies in some of the information that's being provided. And thankfully, we had a lot of support from not only our investigators in-house, but also from our partners in UPD who were supporting us at the scene, and also elsewhere that were following up some of these inconsistencies and leads. That quickly helped us identify the fact that the discrepancies were leading us to believe that this might have been a false call, giving us the ability to de-escalate the situation rather than forcibly enter the location based on the information that we had. We were able to back away, calm things down, and then ultimately make contact with an older resident at the location that has difficulty hearing. And that's why they hadn't heard our initial contacts when we were calling out and knocking on the doors. But when we finally had woken that person and brought them forward, she recognized, and when we told her why we were there, she was supportive of the reasoning, understood why we had responded the way we had, and fortunately, nothing more seriously happened. But the risk here is, this could have ended a lot differently. We have a call of somebody who's committed a very serious assault, saying that they've shot people in a home. They're not going to surrender themselves. They're armed. They're prepared to engage with the police. This could have ended much differently than what it did.
So how long were your guys, from the initial time you got to home to when you finally made contact with the woman? How long was that?
More than an hour and a half.
More than an hour and a half.
Right.
So that's a tense situation. Anything could go wrong, especially when you think there's a shooting.
Absolutely. I mean, you're thinking about, do you have victims inside that you can rapidly access and hopefully rescue? You have this dynamic situation with the safety threat to the officers, because you're dealing with somebody that says they're an armed suspect, that they're not going to surrender themselves. So this is a very heightened situation for us to be responding to. But at the same time, you also have mechanisms that are in place that are questioning everything that we're doing, that are asking those questions, looking for those details and finding those inconsistencies, and then running that information down and saying, wait a minute, this isn't matching. And with that, are able to say, okay, hang on, before we start doing these tactical operations, let's fully explore what's happening here. And we were able to make contact with some family members pretty quickly and diffuse our initial call, and thankfully make contact with that resident and resolve it very peaceably.
So no door was broken down, no flashbang,
no,
like that?
No, thankfully not.
Okay, so typically in these swatting situations,
by the way, this is still a swatting situation still, or is it a fake call and somebody didn't steal the phone number, but rather stole the phone itself? I'm sorry, Pat.
Well, the number that came through to 911 is the resident number for that address. Now, there's a term they call it, swatting or a fake call, kind of one of the same thing. Spoofing. But here the neat thing is, typically there is a footprint that's left, digitally through these kinds of systems. So we are aggressively investigating, the origin of this call, and we'll work with our resources here locally. We'll work with the cell phone companies, with the internet companies. We'll work with our federal partners. we're going to do everything we can to identify the source of this call.
But typically, aren't swatters, they're hard to find because they use this complex network. I mean, the guy could have been out of state, guy or girl. The suspect could have made this call from out of state. So I guess, A, question, do you have any leads as to the origin of this call? And B, why this house? Was this completely picked at random as some guys thinking it's going to be a prank? Or did somebody have something against the resident there?
You know, certainly we think this specific house was targeted, or this specific family, because there was some connection, you know, some knowledge of names. You know, so the motive behind it would be speculative to us at this point. You know, I don't want to get into the investigative methods that we'll utilize, but I can tell you this much. There is typically a digital footprint that follows this. When you're working on the internet, when you're working on phones, you can typically trace through. Even if you're bouncing from server to server across countries in different aspects, some of these networks are very complex and very sophisticated. Some of these are very rudimentary. And that's why we're engaging our investigators now. That's why we're engaging our partners to see how quickly we can identify the source of this call.
So we still know the source. Do we know the suspect? Because you said there's a possible connection to the family from the suspect.
Yeah. We don't know at this point. You know, we're certainly going down those routes. We're going to try to identify that information as quickly as we can, and then hopefully make those connections.
So this is still a spoofing or swatting incident at this point until further notice.
Right. It's still a lot of unknowns. You know, we're asking a lot of questions, and hopefully we'll be able to rapidly identify those connections and answer those questions.
Did anybody else live at that trailer? Was it just the elderly woman?
To my understanding, it was just the senior citizen that lived there.
Okay, and do you know of any incident that's happened with her lately, like dispute with families, someone got left out in inheritance?
Nothing that we've been told.
And do we know, and again, are you disclosing the relationship between this caller and this woman?
Right now, it's all speculation. We're investigating.
Still connecting that. Well, then talk about how wasteful it is for having to use your resources. I know you're going to do every necessary precaution, but this didn't have to happen, and you have to bring out your SWAT team.
Absolutely. You know, we call out an amazing amount of resources from our police department. You know, we had committed everything that was on duty was responding to this initially, containing it, while we were again amassing other resources. We even brought resources from neighboring jurisdictions to support us on this. You know, so it was a substantial investment. In addition to that, you know, recognizing that thankfully here we were able to quickly, you know, within 2 hours, resolve and make contact with our resident. And but this could have gone on for hours and hours if we weren't able to. You will continue to work through this, so it's going to continue to cost us money. The other piece of this is there were a number of calls that were on the 911 network when this happened. You know, when I got the phone call and I start scrolling through just this call, and then I'm looking at what else is holding in the city, there were a couple domestic incidents that were occurring. And I'm looking at those saying there are no cars to assign to that call. And that creates a worry. Is there something else that's happening in the city that resources have now been drawn away from that we need to find resources to respond to?
What's the penalty for swatting, do you know? Or what could this person face if caught?
I'm sorry.
What could this person face if caught? What are the penalties for this?
You know, until we get to the end point and fully understand what the motives behind it were, I don't want to speculate to what the ultimate charges will become.
But it could be a felony charge.
Certainly.
Okay.
Certainly.
Anything else? Thank you, Chief.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.
We'll take your microphones.
Peter, I called the planes just before this started and had him say, hey.